Today we are working on integrating some changes from one of our members to an existing feature, our private messaging component that is available out of the box. And to get that done, what I have created is a local branch off of our Git repository. I've cloned it locally. And you'll see that that's part of our workflow. Is for any feature that we're working on, we create a separate branch for it, so it's easier for us to go back and identify exactly what's going on in there. And if we look at this and say that it has a branch in the public repository also under feature and the name of the branch, particularly what version it is, what feature it is, and then who is the source of all that. So we've got that. I've got that checked out. And one of the files that we're working on today is the actual form for the private message, either as mostly for composing the messages. See at the top of the file we've got the standard plus some other licensing information at the top. Here's all of our things. As we go through this, I'll point out a couple of things that I'm going to change and why I'm going to change them. Right here is the first change I'm going to make. Is include is a way of putting code into another file and then including it. It's common to something else, and we don't have to keep repeating and duplicating that code over and over again. So we write it once, use it a lot of times. The PHP response to all of this is if main file is not available, it generates a warning and then goes on to do the rest of the code. Our other option is to use require, and for require, if this file is not available, PHP issues a fatal warning and the code execution stops. I know that this file in particular is not just optional. It needs to be there. If it's not available, execution does need to stop. And one of the things that the require does for us is it also gives us a warning sooner rather than later that there's a problem. So I'm going to change this to require and instead of include. So now if we have a problem, we get an error right away rather than at the soonest here if there is a post or a get request, because there are some methods that would only be available if main file had been included. At the latest, it's going to happen here. And if we're getting an error here, we still need to track back to figure out what is wrong. But if the error gets issued right here, we're much better off. All right, next thing along is just some file specific values, key value pairs. This is get parameters and post parameters and what their expected type will be. We can use that in our validation and sanitation routine, which comes next. Got some default values, and then here's where the filtering actually takes place, is right here. I'd like to be able to condense that down a little bit, but that'll be something later on. This is just a bit of redirect and setting some one more parameter in the get string. Again, I'll come back to that later. Here's where our actual logic starts. You see right here we have a conditional branch that starts and goes almost all the way to the entire extent of the file. My practice is to return things as quickly as possible, so I'm going to flip this around and invert this a little bit. I'm going to take this out of the bottom, put it back up here at the top, and then by moving this inside the else and then using the inverse there. Now what I have is a test, and if the test is not positive, I immediately return something. If it is, then I go on to conduct the rest of the stuff. This saves me from having to read through all the rest of the information to figure out what is really going on. So that's what I'll do first. Next we have another branch conditional right here, and that covers about half. Yep. So we'll see that there's two main sections to this, and I know what's going on here, so I'm going to just give myself a little bit of note, and any other developer that comes along later on, saying that this section is for sending messages. All right, and we'll go down to where that other section started, which is right here, and I'll do a similar note and say that this section is for composing messages. Now we know what two main functions this file serves, and we've noted it for future reference, anybody that comes to it. I'm going to start focusing on this particular section because this is where the user experience lies, the composing of a message. The sending routines, that's all done in the background and not so much visible to the user. What I'll do is first, if we look, I just added a few lines and now we're up to 225. One of our goals is to reduce any unnecessary code, but also to make it more readable. So I'm going to add some additional blank lines in here to separate the main sections of execution, and see that here that pretty much covers it for that portion of the code. And we're now up to 232. So readability, we've improved it some. We have not altered any code at all other than inverting that one section. So now we're going to start looking at what's inside of here and figuring out what it does and what can we get rid of or improve on. You'll see it here, we've got some conditional code happening. We're setting an object and a handler and creating some values, but we're not doing anything external yet. Here's our first external output from this source, and looking at it, there's a language constant in here and two language constants, and that's it. So it doesn't really have any dependency on what came ahead of it. So what I'm going to do, just to kind of get this up in order here, is to move that ahead of this particular section. So this will be our first output of the script. I also want to try and get rid of all these different echo statements and simplify that, and we will get to that as we go through here. Our next thing is we do have another conditional section, and you notice that the first condition is the same as the one ahead of it, but there's some additional things tied on to it, so we'll come back to that. Here's another echo, and there's only a language constant in here, no variables at all. But if we were to move this ahead of here, we'd skip over these echo statements here, so things would get out of sequence in our rendering, so we don't want to do that just yet. We have another conditional, again with the same condition, reply not equal to 0. So we definitely have some opportunities here. And here's another echo statement, again with only a language constant, but sequence is important, so we'll leave that here for now. And here is our yet another, I think this is our fourth one, right? You've got 1, 2, 3, 4 tests for the same condition throughout this entire script. So that's really inefficient in what we're doing here. Then we come down into the end, and we'll notice that there's our final output is this text area object rendering, and there's 2 conditions for that, and the only difference between the 2 of them is this last parameter. Here it is specified, and here it is just an empty string. If we look at where that gets defined in our processing, it is going to be an empty string if nothing else comes along and changes it. So these 2 are functionally the same. So if I move this one outside of this condition and then remove this completely because it's no longer necessary, we now have simplified our first set of duplicate code. So there we are, we've done that. Now we'll go on to a few other things. By doing that, we've simplified this particular branch, and going back to where things might be defined, we also notice that the same things are here as we have here. So I'm going to grab this. So I have a suspicion that somebody did a copy and paste and didn't pay attention. So I bring them together. Sure enough, these 2 are the same. So let's just get rid of this one. We need this one up here because these values are used in some of these statements later on. So having it afterwards doesn't make any sense. We do need to have it beforehand. So now we are down to 217 lines. All right, now the next thing I'm going to focus on is maybe simplifying some of all of these echo statements. So I'm going to change these into a variable that I can use and just build as we go. And we'll do this. Okay, so we're going to do this for our echoes. We're just going to continue to build this as we go. So I'm going to copy that and go down and find my next echo. And I'm going to replace that with, and I need to append this. So now I'm going to just do this as my continuing pieces here. And keep going. Finally, what I do need to do is I actually do need to echo that out. So there. Alright, so now I've simplified it. I only have one echo statement in that entire section. I am just concatenating the strings as we go along and keeping things in order. Now we need to start looking at all these duplicate conditional checks and see what can we do to consolidate some of this. So first off, this is the same as this. There's nothing else I need to be concerned with. So I'm going to take this and slide it right up here. Because this will be tagged right in here if the reply not equal to 0. Here's another little conditional branch I need to separate out. That doesn't equal to that. We're good. Now I've got an empty condition right here. So what I'm going to do is just, that's the initial condition for both of these. I'm going to just merge those two together like that. And this is our next little section. There's nothing else really to consolidate in here at this point. And this is still, we need to stay in sequence, so we're good there. Here's a section also with that reply not equal to 0. What we have is some information that's just figuring something, what this subject value is, which gets used here. So we're going to bring this portion right up here because it's not affecting what's following it here. But we do have then to go back to this little guy right here and decide what we're going to do with this. You'll see that these two lines are about the same. The only difference being this value right here. So regardless of if reply is 0 or not, we're going to get a table cell, class is the same, type is the same. Only difference is this required option right in here. Everything else is the same. For now, we're going to just go ahead and move, get rid of this guy. Get rid of this guy, get rid of this guy, and get rid of that guy. I'm going to make a note here and say that if subject equals subject is required. Okay, so we've got that. And then after we've done all this, we have still this, and it's broken on a couple lines here, so I'm going to move that up. So I've got that. So I got, here's my final section of stuff here. Now let's just do a quick look at this. And that looks good. We seem to have everything in order right now. No big ultimate changes to all this, just a few branches. Now we're down to just one conditional check on reply not equal to 0. Instead of the 4 we had earlier, we have a few other tests that we were doing anyways. And now we have, instead of executing echo several times, we're only doing it once. This will also help us separate it out later on, as we want to pull this out of this code and put it into a template, so that if anyone wants to change this, they don't have to come in here and hack this code in order to get it done. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this, and I'm going to send it out to my local test environment. So I export this to the file system, and yes, move that, and take a quick peek at it. And I'll bring it over here for you so you can see. You see I've got some messages in here already. If I click on one of the messages and then I want to reply to it, I get the name was already filled in. It gives me the correct subject. This is what I had flagged earlier, that is required, but at this point I have a subject in there so I can remove that requirement option. Again, it's just a little tweak on the UI side, but we can take care of that. And then it does fill in what was previously in the message, so it includes it in my reply. So I close out of that, I go back to my inbox, and if I were to now send a message, it also brings up that same template, same form, and this time there's nothing in it. So everything is working as we would want it to. So let's get this out of the way here. So this now becomes the basis for a new refactor on this. If you look at the end, we were up to 232 lines, I believe it was. Now we're down to 214, and we've also got ourselves ready to move all of this stuff into a template instead of being hard-coded into the logic. I see something else here I wanted style-wise that we'd want to have spaces around any of the concatenation connectors, and we will want to have a language constant that we can put in for that. We can deal with that in our next round, but ultimately we have cleaned this one up quite a bit just by applying some good practices and looking at what we're doing. And we've also improved the readability, and we've also improved some of the commenting in here. Not much, but a little bit. So we're going to save this, and what I would do then is to commit this. Now let's go all the way up to the top. Well, we're going to commit. Locally, and I'm going to tell it that I did some refactor of the private messaging form. And I want to mention the ticket that we have open for this, and it's going to be number 446. I have an option to just commit this locally or commit and push this to the remote repository. I am going to go ahead and push this to the remote repository because, again, I'm using a separate branch for this. It's not affecting our other development, and it'll be easier to integrate later on. So now I can also share this with the other developers so they can see some of the practices and the applications of what we've done here. And that is it for this session on code refactoring, code standards, and some of the best practices that we use to move ahead with an existing project and an existing feature and maintain existing functionality while making improvements and positioning ourselves for additional features for the same components. That'll do it. Thanks a lot.